the moms and dads conversation as it pertains to same-sex marriage or partnership in raising children. What does that look like? Because so often I've heard, you know, a marriage or a partnership or to raise a child, it takes a mom and a dad. So how would you address that?
So the thing that I learned about 15 years ago when I was in grad school, the cutting edge research at the time was showing that what children need psychologically to develop is stability. Like first and foremost, second, third, last, and always, the more stable and predictable a child's environment is, the better off their psychological development is going to be. And so the research at the time was showing that multi-parent households, whether it's mom and dad or mom and mom or two best friends or mom and grandmother, it's the presence of the second adult, the second responsible set of eyes, the second paycheck, another person's 24 hours a day, that is what actually makes the difference for the children, because it adds to that stability.
Okay.
Households with more than one adult in them are fundamentally, on average, more stable than households with only one adult in them. So it's the presence of multiple adults that makes the key difference. The gender roles of those adults doesn't really matter at the end of the
day. Okay. So I've often heard from the pulpit that it does make a difference. So are there numbers to support that, or?
Is there research to support the idea that the gender does make a difference? Not that I'm aware of, in terms of research validated literature.
Okay, right. Anybody can do a study and
yeah. I mean, I think there's, I would imagine you could probably do a phenomenological study where you interviewed people and find that there are some benefits to that mindset. And, you know, traditional gender roles certainly gives you a ready script for how to divide household labor. And so there's, I don't want to knock that ideology. I know for a lot of people, it does help organize their lives in a fashion that's useful. But to say that that is like the one true way to raise functional children, I got no science to back that up.
Okay.
Conventional gender roles in your household, because that's just what works for you. Make sure that when you're performing those tasks, you're recruiting all of the kids in rotation to help you.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah, if your husband is changing the oil, like this month, take your son, next month, take your daughter. Because the problem is we just don't even think. We're just like, you know, I'm headed out to do some yard work. Let me grab my boy.
Right.
When it's like, wait, your girl needs to know how to prune a tree too.
Sure. It's pretty funny because I come from a very conservative background, and I'm surprised that I got the upbringing that I did, because my dad did do that with my brother and I. Every other month it was, or just when we needed to change our oil, we were responsible for doing that ourselves. And as we got older, you know, if we wanted to pay someone else to do that, then certainly we could, but we needed to know how to do it for ourselves as well. Same thing with mowing a lawn. He was out there coaching us, and if we did something wrong, we were going to hear about it, no matter if it was my brother or myself. So I'm grateful that I got that. And even still today, thankfully, my dad now lives just 15 minutes away, and he's helped me, you know, hang my own light fixtures, and I've been the one doing it. He's just been the one directing. So I'm grateful that I have someone that, you know, I don't know if he just thought I wasn't ever going to get married, or if, if he knew that I just wanted to know that, because I do need to know why things work the way they work. And I have that type of mind. And I think that he probably recognized that in me very early on. So I'm grateful that, you know, I got that sort of upbringing where I know a lot of people didn't. So, some of the other questions that people had asked, or information that they had given me about, you know, gender roles as it pertains to their childhood and how it would affect them growing up. one of the things was, of course, transgender, right? Because I
Yeah.
do have quite a few friends in the LBGTQIA. I have to say it all together really fast or I'll forget, community. So, and I've had, because I do still have a lot of friends that are in the very conservative wing from my childhood. And so they want to know, sometimes I think they want to argue just for the sake of arguing. And sometimes I think they truly do want a little bit of insight. And I've seen some positive shifts happen through healthy conversations. So that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this podcast, is to facilitate those conversations and get people to start thinking.
Thank you.
So yeah, so one of the things is, I've heard the term gender confusion, right? Especially as it pertains to young people who are, maybe young boys, and they're playing with dolls, or they're dressing as quote unquote girls would dress. So what is that? Is that gender confusion? Is it them wanting attention? Because I've heard all of these things. So what is it?
It's kids being kids. And I would say it's a positive sign, actually, because children are curious about the world around them. Like, we innately arrive on this planet trying to figure out which end is up and who is this, what is this place, and who are we in it. And so children naturally are drawn to try out different things. It's actually fairly common, if children feel safe enough emotionally to cross-dress when they play dress up. Because to a child, it's not, oh, I'm wearing a dress, this is all like radical gender expression. It's just, my favorite character on TV is a female superhero, so I want to wear her costume.
Right.
Like their frame of reference doesn't yet have a notion of gender that's developed the way ours is as an adult. So that kind of play is pretty common. Children who are doing that, like I said, because it's common, that doesn't necessarily mean that that kid is going to later say they're transgender or gender fluid or any of the trans spectrum identities.
Okay.
Because play is different than dysphoria.
Sure. Yeah. And just from my own perspective, because as a child, I remember I kept getting these Barbie dolls and I couldn't stand them. The only thing I liked about it was the dresses. For me, I was just like, why do I have this plastic human-like thing? Like it didn't resonate with me for whatever reason. And so literally I would change their clothes and throw them in the back of a dump truck and wheel them around. Because that was me. I was that tomboy, if you will, who climbed trees and liked to play with dump trucks, and I liked to race go-karts and play softball, all of that stuff. That was my thing. So my parents didn't think anything of it, but I know that some parents probably would. So
definitely.
Yeah.
I find people that I work with, how much gender is like a significant thing for them varies all over the map. For some people, it's just a really fundamental, important way that they understand the world around them. And they're the ones who tend to struggle the most if they have a child who turns out to be gender nonconforming in some fashion.
Sure.
Where other people whose like their innate way of looking at the world, they're kind of like isn't seriously gender informed. They're like, oh, okay, like my son's a daughter, whatever. Like, I don't think anyone actually takes it quite that smoothly, to be frank.
Right.
But there's definitely a wide range. It seems to really depend on how much that gender concept means to the person.
Okay. So you used a term just a moment ago, gender fluid. I have not heard that term. So what does that mean?
Gender fluid is one, there's many synonyms for it, but gender fluid and basically talks about the idea of your gender identity is something that fluctuates. Exactly in what way it fluctuates, how people describe the way it fluctuates varies a lot. But it's basically people whose like internal sense of my gender can change day to day, week to week. And so gender fluid and non-binary people tend to be the folks who are using they, them pronouns.
Yes, right.
Because with that change or that just not feeling like gender at all part of their existence, they, them is really the only thing that feels right most of the time.
That's a really interesting, I'm going to call it a phenomenon just because it's so new, and I think it's so positively radical to me. And I have a friend who I haven't met online, who is very vocal about this, they, them, how she feels about herself and being non-binary. And I think that that's so important and respectful of other humans to just ask them, how do you want to be addressed? Certainly changes are happening, but it's very small and very slow. So I think the work that you're doing is so, so, so important. So thank you for continuing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, education is a key component. There's also
Absolutely.
a lot of research that shows we fear the things we don't understand.
Yeah.
And if you're cisgender and you've never had any personal reason to really think about this stuff, it's really freaking weird.
Yeah.
I myself struggled for a long time to get the hang of using they, them pronouns.
Yeah.
Just like I didn't have any objection to it, just
Right.
mechanically, it felt strange for a while.
It's just new.
Right. Guess what? I started doing it because I had more friends who had they, them pronouns. At this point, it doesn't faze me at all.
Right.
A few years ago, I found it a tongue twister at times, for sure.
Sure. Well, thank you for that. As far as it goes with adults who are just kind of coming into their own, right? They've gotten away from mom and dad. They were kind of suppressed, which happens a lot, unfortunately. How does that transition look? I know it's different for every single person, and I'll start by giving you the other side, right? Because I know how a lot of people were raised in conservative, especially Christian homes. And that is, the common one is God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. And, God doesn't make any mistakes. And I don't think it's that black and white, because the example, and I have very limited knowledge, but I try to use logic in these things, right? So in the case of a hermaphrodite, I don't look at them as a mistake. It's just a physical representation of something different.
Right.
It's not a man or a woman, it's both, and they can choose, right?
Right.
So if a physical thing like that can manifest, then certainly things that we can't see chemically probably are manifesting as well in other people. So that's my logic. Can you expound on that?
The preferred term for hermaphrodite is intersex.
Okay.
And typically these are babies that when they're born, they have ambiguous genitalia. And up until fairly recently, the doctors, often without even talking to the parents, would just make a decision.
Oh, wow.
And alter the infant's genitals.
Oh my God. Seriously?
Seriously. This was in the 80s and 90s. Intersex adults coming forward and talking about their experience was like the very, very beginning of the gender component of the LGBTQIA family starting to show up in public.
Wow.
Because there were a couple of noteworthy cases in the 90s where basically the assigned gender at birth that the doctors made surgically was the wrong call. And so a couple of these individuals started to transition socially as adults because the doctor's original assignment when they were infants was wrong. And so you had someone who'd been raised as a girl now shifting to live as a man.
Right.
He they had been born with ambiguous genitalia.
Mm-hmm.
So it's related to the trans experience, but similar because of the different because of the whole physiological component.
Right.
And that's where I think, you've got this like objective reality that some people are born with XY chromosomes. Some people have hormone imbalances that make their hormones look nothing like a typical person of that biological sex. You also have people who are born with ambiguous genitalia. So on a scientific level, like you said, it's not as black and white as we typically think. And I actually really love the God never makes mistakes argument, because I personally think who said trans and intersex people
Right.
are mistakes.
Right. Well, I can tell you who says that, but we won't go there.
Who says God didn't send us trans folks that we could get our heads on straight about what gender is and isn't and how it's supposed to be?
Right.
Like, who's to say that they're not actually messengers?
Right.
Because in Native American and East Asian traditions, trans people were referred to as two-spirit people. Actually multiple names for them depending on the tradition. But in a lot of different places around the globe, trans folk in their tribal settings were seen as shamans. They were seen as holy people because they had both aspects of the divine feminine and the divine masculine in them. And so they were revered as special people who had extra communion with divinity.
I love that.
Right?
Ooh, I love that.
Right. So I mean, God doesn't make mistakes. Well, who are we to decide what's a mistake?
What's a mistake? Exactly.
They're here.
Exactly.
What do you want to do about it?
Yeah. And I've even gone so far as, I hate this phrase, but I swear it's true. I'm married to a Black man and I have a gay best friend. So, right. So, people who say, oh, I'm not racist, I have a Black best friend, or I'm not homophobic, I have a gay best friend. I really do have a gay best friend. And so I find myself oftentimes, I will go to battle for people I love. I really will. And the thing about him, he also comes from a very conservative Christian home, and I do too. And so those two kind of households, if you will, they mesh as where he and we collide with both of them.
Right.
And so I've heard, and I won't say from whom, but I've heard people say, oh, well, he's gay. And, he may have been born that way. Like God may have made him that way, but that doesn't change the fact that he shouldn't be practicing.
I grew up Catholic, so I'm really familiar with that particular slice of the moral dilemma. Because the Catholic Church directly preaches a love the sinner, hate the sin approach. That basically says, cool, you're gay, you're called to be abstinent.
Right.
And when I was younger, that made a lot of sense to me. But then as I got into becoming a social worker, it was in the height of the against gay marriage constitutional amendment movement in the early 2000s. And so, like you were saying, for you like to base things on logic. For myself, a lot of my radicalization, if you will, from being a conservative Republican Catholic to the queer, sex positive, progressive anarchist I am today, like that trajectory happened because for me, the fundamental truth of my Christian upbringing was to love the least among you, take care of the least among you. The parable of separating the goats from the sheep had a huge impact on my development as a child. And so my change has come from learning about how racism, homophobia, classism, misogyny, all of these social ills cause harm. Because I am a very fundamentally pragmatic person.
Yeah.
And so if you tell me that practice X is causing psychological, physical harm to another human being, my Christian duty, as I understand it, is to change that thing so that harm is no longer occurring. Because
Exactly.
that's what it means to love my neighbor as myself.
Right.
And so as I learned more and more about how different social problems were creating deep problems in individual people's lives, like I just became more and more liberal and moved away from a lot of the religious and political tenets that I was raised with, because I had all this social science research and all of these people that I met once I moved out of small town Indiana saying, this hurts me and this is why. So to bring it back, like to tell someone, oh, you're gay, now you're called to be abstinent, like that is actually a really tall order.
Mm-hmm.
Abstinence, lifelong abstinence is hard.
Mm-hmm.
I would say it's a worthy goal. For me, being sex positive includes supporting people
Mm-hmm.
who are called to celibacy. Like that can be a healthy choice, but it's such a specific and difficult thing. I think it's an incredible hardship to tell someone that simply because they're attracted to the same gender, you now can't express your sexuality for the rest of your life.
Right. What kind of things can that lead to? Because I want people to walk away knowing that their words can cause real, legitimate problems in another human. What can that lead to?
What can't it lead to? We've got research showing that adverse experiences in childhood, bullying is included in that list, leads to problems with heart disease, tendencies towards smoking, work performance, relationship satisfaction, developing diabetes, the odds of having a drug or alcohol problem, suicidality, obesity, basically every public health epidemic that we're worried about
Right.
has undigested, unaddressed childhood pain at its core.
Absolutely.
And so when someone tells you, like someone that you care about, especially if it's your caregiver that you're relying on as a young person, that something that is fundamentally intrinsic about who you are as a person
Mm-hmm.
is wrong, shameful, immoral, disgusting, like you're going to take that in at a really deep level, and it is going to fundamentally alter your ability to be healthy, happy, satisfied, and stable
For
later
sure.
in life.
Yeah.
It's a huge part of why the LGBTQIA population has such an astronomically high suicide rate.
Yeah, absolutely.
General
And
population.
that's one of the reasons why I will battle. I don't care if I know you or not. I will I typically stay off of social media just because my energy needs to stay a certain and I don't want to get myself too riled up. But if I see something happening, you better believe it's gonna throw down.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I fundamentally have adopted a value of simply just believing in good intentions just with humans in general.
sure.
Until you show me otherwise, I'm going to assume we're both coming from a place of positive intent.
Yes.
And so I typically will respond with information, with education, and also sometimes the way people express themselves online, like, whoo,
I know.
close Facebook and walk away.
Exactly. Well, I have one more question I want to ask you, and then I'm going to open it up to you to give you an opportunity to say whatever it is you want to make sure the general public knows and walks away with. But the last question that I wanted to address was one somebody gave me about, feeling not attacked. I don't even really know the right word, so I won't try to find it, but women who say have children and a full-time job and maybe even are at an executive level in their position, there's all kinds of mom shaming, especially with social media. And a lot of times it's passive aggressive mom shaming, right? So there's a lot of questions is, oh my gosh, how do you juggle it all and then nothing gets asked of, if there's a father involved, there's no questions asked, of him. He's just
Mhm.
kind of expected to be strong and do it all. So
Right.
how would you address that, especially as it pertains to, again, going back to what we talked about earlier? We want to create a healthy model, I guess, for kids that are being raised so that they can have healthier relationships going forward. That's really the whole gist of this book, is to create healthy humans from here forward.
Absolutely. I mean, it's tricky because our culture fundamentally has strong elements of power and control woven throughout it.
Hmm.
Um, I don't actually know how to debate anyone who doesn't understand that there's privilege and oppression at work
Right.
in our world writ large. Like I really don't know how you deny that at this point in history.
Yes.
And so there's a lot that we have to unpack and change whenever we're talking about these kinds of things, because our intellectual understanding and our use of technology changes much more quickly than our emotional understanding and our innate wisdom, because emotions and wisdom are body-based learning. It's what you feel. It's what
Mhm.
seems right. It's what your gut instinct tells you.
Right.
All of those kinds of intuitive things heavily inform the way we operate as human beings, and they are slow to change. And you really have to stay on top of being intentional about it for a long period of time to actually shift it. So I say this because when I get frustrated with progress in my own life or with my clients, I remember the scale of the problem we're up against.
Yeah, true.
We're not asking, how do you go have a successful 5-mile hike in Shades Park? We're asking, how do you climb Mount Everest?
Right.
Different scales of problem here.
Sure.
And so much of what we understand about what it means to be an adequate and effective parent has undergone radical change over the last 100 years,
Oh, yeah.
and back and forth in different ways. So like 200 years ago, it was fairly common that like your average family had like a 4-room house and everyone was sleeping in the same room, or the kids were sharing a bed with each other.
Right.
So like physical proximity, being kind of all in each other's business because everyone's around the same physical space all the time, was the norm. So a lot of the behaviors that we now call attachment parenting was just the status quo.
Right.
In some ways. Not getting into the good old days, but patterns, they're important. And then as we moved into the Industrial Revolution and the modern era, parenting advice became very much about treating children like they're small adults. Notions like let them cry it out, children should be seen and not heard, like minimizing physical touch and presence with children at very young ages.
Hmm.
The early 20th century was like the cutting edge, this is how you do it kind of advice. So if you're talking to grandma and she rude your parent according to Dr. Spock, and you're trying to do attachment parenting, the two of you are never going to see eye to eye because your entire worldview is in conflict.
Completely different. Sure.
And that's part of why I think there's such a huge confusion and so much room for mommy shaming and those kinds of social slights, because
Mhm.
literally, depending on what parenting advice you're looking for, you'll find 20 different answers to the same question,
Yeah.
because they're all coming from different philosophies and different understandings.
Right.
And so I am not personally a parent, and I'm glad I don't personally have to navigate that minefield.
Right.
I've taught a lot of parenting classes as part of my professional career, and I always tell parents, stop and consider what kind of adult you want your child to be. What kind of values do you want them to have? What kind of habits, behaviors, ways of being in the world do you want your child to have when they're grown up?
Hmm.
Make your parenting decisions according to that outcome. So if you want a child who's emotionally well adjusted, you're going to have to parent them in an emotionally centered way that helps them learn how to use their words to describe what they're feeling internally and manage their emotions instead of burying them,
Right.
for example. So to me, it's think about who your kid wants to be when they're older and chart your own course and be confident in your own decisions, because children, thank God, are incredibly resourceful and they bounce.
Right.
It's actually imperative for proper human psychological development for you to experience difficulty and your parents making mistakes. If we could put our children in a sanitized bubble where nothing ever harmed them, we would be harming them.
Yeah, because then they're unable to cope when
Right.
something tries to harm them.
So allowing your children to experience natural consequences of their mistakes, allowing yourself to be human with your children and acknowledge your mistakes as a parent, giving them opportunities to experience rupture and repair is what you're looking for.
Absolutely.
And
Uh,
most cases, like 2/3 of families, things are good enough and stable enough. You can screw up a heckin' lot before your kid's gonna need someone like me.
right. Awesome. Well, I just want to open it up to you because I'm sure what you do is so multifaceted, and I'm sure I haven't even scratched the surface yet. So I just want to open it up to you, like I said, to give a couple of minutes or a few seconds worth of information for both people who are maybe going through a gender crisis, if you will, and then people on the outside looking in as far as how they can be compassionate. Like, I think that's the minimum we can expect from someone is to be compassionate, how they can do that in a more effective way.
Oh, being more compassionate in today's environment, that is not the easiest question on the books right now.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be that. I just want you to be able to feel free to share whatever wisdom you think the world needs to hear right now.
Empathy, 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 empathy. It's a teachable skill. It's part of learning how to manage yourself emotionally, because human beings are innately social creatures.
Mm-hmm.
We survive as a species because we collaborate and work together and live together in communities. We don't have fangs or claws. Without each other, fundamentally, we don't survive.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of ways that our neurology has evolved to reflect that. And one of them is mirror neurons, which are particular neurons in our brain that exist explicitly to help us get emotionally in sync with whoever's around us so that we get into the social context.
Okay.
So if you think about like some time that you had like a really badass day and then you come home and your husband's had like the exact opposite day, what happens to your good mood when you start interacting with him? Right.
Or
But,
the opposite.
right. But interacting with you, you might notice that his mood starts to lift because you're in such a good place. That's mirror neurons at work.
Okay.
Those mirror neurons are reflecting, they're picking up on the emotional state of each of you and bringing you to equilibrium. It's happening unconsciously. It's just woven into how our brains operate.
It's so funny that you say that. And I'm totally going to make this about me right now because I feel it happening. I'm very in touch with my energy. And I know it sounds completely woo-woo and spiritual, but I can feel energy and I am an empath. So when he comes home and he's ranting and raving and there's just a certain like negativity about what's going on with him, I literally can feel it all right here. And I'm like, okay, I'm sorry, but cut. I can't. Yep. We got to stop.
Yep.
And we're going to breathe. It's a real thing for sure.
And that's where empathy and compassion also require boundaries and self-care.
Yes.
Because compassion without boundaries is toxic.
Yep.
Both to you and the person you're trying to help.
Right.
And so part of being an empathetic, compassionate person is knowing yourself well enough to kind of know, like, I'm not really a great place to hear about your terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. I had one myself. Can we reconnect in an hour? And then, being able to hear that and receive it and not take it personally
Yes.
that your partner or your loved one is looking out for their best interests, and if we're all looking out for our own personal best interests, and then talking directly about how to bring those interests together, this is how you get a social society that works for most people without privilege and oppression in the mix.
I love it. That's a great spot to end it. That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time. I'm so glad you took the time out. You and I have never spoken before, and I don't think we've ever met, have we?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. But I really appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll have more conversations in the future.
For sure.
All right. Thank you so much. And thanks for joining another episode of Real Talk with Amber.